All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order for the Capital Funding Protection Committee of Thursday, December 1st, 2022. If we could have a roll call, please.
Devin Reese, Oscar Delgado, Charlene Bybee,
Here.
Paul Anderson,
Here.
Bob Lucy, Jeannie Herman, Justin Ivory,
Here.
Andrew Diss,
Here.
Elise Bunkowski, Chris Cobb, Dave Solaro.
Here.
Good.
All right,
have a
we've got a
quorum.
quorum. Thank you. With that,
Move to approve. I'll second it.
that was like pretty good. Unison. That was pretty good. All right, is there any?
No public comment.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. That'll take us on to item 2.02, information and discussion on the anticipated cadence and workload for future meetings. Mr. Searcy.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Adam Searcy for the record, Washington County School District. We like to keep this updated to try and keep this committee abreast of where we're going and also offer some opportunity for input on future potential agenda items. So skipping today ahead to our next regularly scheduled meeting of February 2023. You'll hear a little bit about several of these items tonight. So this will be updates in February related to the external audit. The facility modernization plan actually will be a pretty prominent item for discussion in February. We'll be presenting even more detailed information than what we have today and really be looking for an opportunity in February for some input from this committee on some very significant but preliminary recommendations from this study. So look forward to that. And then in February, you should expect to receive a significant update on the Debbie Smith project. As you may be aware, we've proceeded with the initial phase of that project. We've actually begun some abatement and demolition in preparation for new construction. And by February, we'll have a significant update to present to the committee. So moving into April, again, every even numbered month, we will bring to you a significant update on the Central Transportation Yard modernization upgrade project. That's likely for information only, but that's in design right now, and by April we'll be ready to present some significant updates. Again, with the Debbie Smith CTE Academy High School, at that point we anticipate being at a place where we can potentially recommend budget augmentation. As you may recall, this committee had previously approved a budget. We then received bids far in excess of that, and we've since redesigned and rebid or are in the process of rebidding much of that work. We will be in April at a point where we can better estimate how much, if any, additional funding is necessary to complete the scope of that project. That's what we'll have on the docket for April. And then, of course, the 5-year CIP, which will be significantly informed by that facility modernization plan. Both of those documents, potentially the final version of the facility modernization plan for approval by this committee to recommend to the school board at that time, as well as the 5-year CIP that will be informed and will likely include a significant number of projects stemming from that FMP. So again, now we're getting into the fiscal year cycle. We're in April looking at the 5-year CIP flowing in as an offshoot from the 5-year CIP into the FY24 fiscal year 24 capital renewal plan. We're going to hear tonight a lot about the performance of the FY22 and the FY23 capital renewal plan. So in June 2023, we'll be looking ahead at what our project list is for the next fiscal year. Again, with an update on the central transportation yard, we anticipate at that point being near a place of construction phase funding approval. Like we've completed design and we're about to go into construction, and we have a budgetary estimate for your consideration. You'll see these facility modernization plan line items as almost like a placeholder. This will look to take up a significant or generate a significant amount of projects and work for this committee to consider budget allocation requests as offshoots from that study. So those are really almost like placeholders for the foreseeable future for this committee. Of course, August, we run our committee memberships on the fiscal year cycle. So in August, assuming we do need to meet, we would have our regular elections and potential new membership introductions. And then into September, and I'll note this 1 week earlier than typical due to the Washoe County School District fall break. Wanted to note the potential update on enrollment and possible action for construction phase funding associated with the new elementary school in the Stonebrook area. You guys may recall approving the design phase funding for that. We are in the process of initiating the design, and we'll be at a place by September 2023 to consider the need to move into the construction phase, reserving the right to pause for a school year if that's the appropriate decision. So that's kind of the look ahead. I just wanted to close by reiterating, I was mentioning earlier, I know everybody's busy, and I think going forward we're going to work harder to get into your calendars this meeting. I know you're not necessarily tracking our business on a weekly basis, and we only meet every other month. I really appreciate your time and being here. Look for those calendar appointments for these meetings coming out shortly after tonight's meeting.
Member Dis.
Thank you, Adam. In the past, haven't we submitted a report to the legislature every 2 years on what this committee does? Did we do that? Am I forgetting it? Or is it coming up? Or because session is in February, so.
We did that recently.
It was like last meeting or the meeting before. So.
Okay,
Been
all
a
right.
couple meetings ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
It was like spring of 2022, I want to
Okay.
say.
Okay.
I know we did it recently.
Yeah, it was, yeah, Pete was still here. It was his last meeting, I think.
Probably June 2022.
I think so.
Okay, so we're,
Yep.
we're covered. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Searcy? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item 2.03, which is a presentation and discussion update on the district-wide school facility modernization plan. And I'm guessing Mr. Searcy will start this one, and Mr. Mills will come up and take it from there.
You want to drive?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give Mr. Mills the reins. He'll be doing most of the speaking, but just as a brief introduction, Canon Design, as you recall, was hired to conduct an independent review of all of our district facilities with an emphasis on equity and efficiency across all the district schools. We've convened a variety of stakeholder groups and have made significant progress. And really tonight's an update in support of any potential outcomes. So I'll turn the floor over immediately to Paul Mills with Canon Design. Thank you.
Great. Great to be with you again, and it's a pleasure to serve your district. Tonight, we have 4 objectives that are out here, in addition to giving just a progress report of where we've been, what we've been up to, and where we're going at the end. Really, there's 2 main points. We're going to give you a snapshot of some preliminary findings from our study that's ongoing, and also make recommendations for early action project to take action on. And that's with a great sense of urgency due to time and need associated with it. So since November, in our last meeting, when I presented with you, we've been very busy. There were community forums held in person and virtually in various parts of the city, different times of day, with a lot of good participation. And we put out a community survey with responses, over 1,400 responses that were received. Proud to say that every school community did have representation, people checking the box that they have relationships with every school throughout. The proportionality is probably traditional to what you've experienced as a district before, in terms of folks that seem to participate in surveys more than others. And there's no real change to that despite our best efforts to get a lot of participation. But it does compel us to step up our efforts for our next round of surveys that will take place in January and February. We're in the middle of disaggregating the findings by geography, by socioeconomics, ethnicity, et cetera, so that we really can understand the different perspectives that are out there as not just one homogeneous preference or tendency, but rather that we're looking at those nuances that, around your different communities that have different sets of priorities and needs that are out there. Facility assessment, field observations are complete, and we expressed to you and kind of give you in the last presentation an overview of what we're doing with our assessment, but that rubric is built, the benchmarking measures are in place, the instrument is created and is weighted based on findings from that survey. But we're in final stages of QA/QC and cost estimating associated with those assessments. But we do have some preliminary findings we're going to share with you tonight, and there is enough trends that are out there for us with confidence to make recommendations on some early action projects. The capacity utilization study is something that is ongoing as well, and you've seen the typical number of students divided into the capacity, what kind of utilization we have at the schools, and we're taking a deeper dive around it, looking at the various types of programs that exist at the schools, from special ed to all the co-located services that take up space because the schools are old and weren't designed necessarily with spaces for those types of services and programs. And we want to make sure we're not handicapping schools by assuming that classrooms are available for space when really there are vital services being rendered. So we're doubling down and making sure that we're accommodating those programs. And then the options development, that really gets to the heart of the actual planning. How we design what types of outcomes can come about, like we talked about at the last thing. We had one workshop with the district planning group a couple weeks ago, and I'm real proud to say we had participation from the companion committee or working group that we assembled, the stakeholder advisory working group. And I'm real excited that we had one student from Hug High School that participated, and she was an active participant and was humbling with her perspectives, and she really kept all the adults in the room on best behavior as part of it. We do have another work session with them scheduled for January 9th, in which we will finalize a lot of the options that are going to be put forward to your stakeholders in your communities. A little bit of a lag here. All right, so moving on to preliminary findings. Again, this is draft, and we're going to have some kind of good, fair, poor, stoplight, red, yellow, green type output for you to kind of see where things are going, but the actual finite numbers and such are still in flux. They're not going to dramatically change, and we definitely have some findings that we can speak to. As we shared with you before, this educational adequacy assessment really addresses some strategic issues, not just, hey, what's broken in your buildings, like a condition assessment would, but also what's missing and how educationally appropriate the facilities are, and it really informs things. We have all these prototypes that you can see with the page that's up on the slide right now, different eras of time, different buildings that were repeated several times over. So the educational adequacy assessment measures all your facilities using a common yardstick based on your current standards, your education specifications, which are used and by and large are the recipe for what goes into your brand new schools that you're building today. So we're using that as the yardstick to measure up to. So where you fall short of that, those inequities are measurable as part of it. So we use gap analysis against those standards to inform the types of improvements that are needed at your schools. We use it also to benchmark and see which ones are the most adequate, the ones that are least adequate, and we can make judgment calls about the types of actions to be responsive to your communities. So the way it's designed is such that there's 6 broad categories. They're listed here with the icons that are there. Beneath those are 30 KPIs, we're calling them key performance indicators, but really they're subcategories of those 6. And beneath those, there's over 150 discrete measures. There's a lot of data that got put into this framework that we created with your team. And the weights that roll up into scores that we can benchmark all the schools against were informed by the district planning group through some interactive work sessions we did and discussion, as well as some questions in the community survey. We actually use those to draw some of those weights. So it's not an arbitrary instrument. It actually reflects the will of people that are participating in providing input into the process. I mentioned before also that we have some variable standards that are built into this that really target equity. And what that means is we have certain facility supports. For instance, spaces that can support some of your neediest students, for special education, for alternative education, for impoverished students, and sadly in some cases where we have homeless students, having the sorts of facilities to support them isn't something that's necessarily needed everywhere in the same proportion. So we did look at the actual students' bodies that were attending your school, so it wasn't just an assessment of brick and mortar, but really for the sake of the human beings that those buildings are serving. So I'll give you a flavor of the types of information that's built into it. I'm not going to slog you through all the findings, et cetera. We're going to have all that published in a way you can, to your heart's content. We can roll up our sleeves and really look at a lot of data together. But educational program as a broad category really gets at that ed spec. It's the types of spaces in the right sizes and the right number of them and in the right adjacencies among one another that's responsible and is the recipe for how you design new schools today. It's not, in addition to general education, it's those specialized spaces to support special education services, as well as pre-K education, early education, CTE, STEM, and the arts. The next category is relationships and collaboration, as the name would suggest. It really gets into the way we as architects like to design schools today, to not just house students and receive content from a sage on a stage, but rather be active participants and exercise agency in the education process with facilities that are flexible. That, as you know, in your newer schools like HUG, where your classrooms are actually suites that surround a hub that has this common space where a lot of interaction can happen. Variable size rooms around there for one-on-one interventions or opportunities for enrichment, project-based learning, collaborative learning, and for interdisciplinary instruction to happen. We have objective ways to measure that, and that shows up in the scores in that category there. Wellness, as the name would imply, really gets into health, but it's not just physical health, but also social emotional supports and how the facility can support that. Things, just simple things like daylighting, a very important aspect and proven research that suggests how test scores are improved. So we definitely include that with a significant weight in there, but it's really about how comfortable the building is, how well the systems are working to keep you warm, safe, and dry. But do you have those spaces for nurse stations, for counseling, and the sorts of supports? And just like I mentioned on the one bullet, that there are variable supports in there where if the socioeconomics of the students attending a school is disproportionately high versus others, that there are extra weight that goes towards some of those facility needs to support it. It's not just you're poor so you have a worse score, it's poor so you need this facility. Does the facility exist? And then if it doesn't, then you get kind of a double pain on the score. Safety and security, as the name would imply, really speaks to physical health and security and safety of our students and staff at the schools, but it looks at things like potential flooding where we are. It looks at proximity to fire and police stations that we use through GIS systems to geolocate. It looks at also pedestrian safety and all your various systems, fire alarms, security systems, cameras, et cetera, as part of it. Technology and furniture is really how we outfit the building, right? It's kind of, some people say, why do you lump those together? But it's not the stuff you build when you build a new project. It's the stuff when you move in, and you can refresh over time. And we like to say it's one of those low-dangling fruit, high-paying are, high bang for buck investments that can be made that really can change the environment and the working conditions for your staff, as well as the opportunities for students to learn at low cost. Operational utility really gets into the nuts and bolts and meat and potatoes of the facility. How big is the site? Can we expand on it? Is it in close proximity to the students that it's serving? Is it scaled at a size that's efficient? And looking at things like energy efficiency and sustainability as well. So one example here, this is one of the 120 or 150 plus measures that are in there. We looked at the energy consumption of the facilities and benchmarked them using an industry standard called the energy use intensity metric, with the EUI. It's really a way to normalize gas and electricity, regardless of what types of energy sources you're using in different proportions, perhaps at different schools, and normalize that around how much energy must be consumed in order to operate the building. And we benchmark those using that scale. And if you look at kind of the middle there, where we start off with kind of the least efficient at the top, working your way to the most efficient, I highlighted kind of the force ranking of EUI by campus that you can see there. And looking at the left-hand side, those are your least efficient schools, and they tend to be your older facilities. There are some outlier cases where indeed some of your newer facilities from the 90s, even early 2000s, are creeping up towards the top. Now, those are newer than a lot of the ones that are consuming a similar rate per square foot per year. But there are physical conditions. They're not brand new schools like the new ones you're building today that show up on the right-hand side. Just categorically there, when you look at some of the names of them, your middle schools, your older middle schools tend to be your biggest energy hogs as part of it, with Trainer, Vaughn, Swope before the renovation, Sparks Middle School, Clayton, all kind of clustered towards the top among some of your other ones. And this is benchmarked per square foot, so your bigger buildings are normalized to your smaller ones as part of it. So that's one example. That measure gets put in with 150 others with weights put on them, and we get scores on a 100-point scale for all of the facilities under the different categories and KPIs. So I mentioned before, we're still crunching numbers, so we're not ready to publish finite numbers, but we are confident to share with you kind of a bracketing good, fair, poor, stoplight type report here. So you see your 6 broad categories, the overall adequacy off to the right, and this is the average for all those various prototypes that are out there. The elementaries at the top, the middles in the middle, and your high schools down at the bottom. And you'll see they're kind of forced ordered in terms of the age. So your older baby boom 50s, 60s buildings, you look off to the right, they're the ones in red in the elementaries. The ones that are younger are showing up in the yellow range, and your brand new ones are showing up in green, as logic would tell. And we're proud we didn't lean on the scales or anything. We designed this thing with best of intents and best practices, and it's just the way it's working out. Those scores are largely driven by your educational program and relationships and collaboration categories. That speaks to the way that the building is actually designed. We design them differently now, and categorically that really draws down your older schools in a significant way. Similar pattern we see with the middle schools as well as the high schools. So now I'm going to start actually pointing out a few specific schools. So here's the same thing. It's ordered a little bit different, but we have the overall adequacy off to the left-hand side, your 6 categories. And then I put on the same page that's not factored into the adequacy. It's kind of a separate measure and a separate type of assessment, but the facility condition assessment that we also did peer review work, working hand in hand with staff that does this on a routine annualized basis. And we've put some cost estimating that we're working on with it to update costs, et cetera, and we found that the instrument is valid. But you can, as you can see here, kind of force ranked by the score, there's definitely different classes of high schools, that all of them being on the page. Worcester, Sparks, Reed, McQueen, and working down the way of your comprehensive high schools towards the very top, Innovations and Inspire, and your alternative programs that are out there are really towards the top, which is definitely something we're focused on, working with the DPG of some of your most fragile school communities and making sure that the facilities that support them is commensurate and up for the task to serve those students. So again, similar to kind of the categories that we saw, the educational program, relationships and collaboration tend to really drive down the scores on it. We'll come back to high schools in a second, but here's your middle schools, the same metric and breakdown. Now, on the high schools, you notice we had Hug down at your brand new school. That's the only one in green. All the others are kind of in that fair to poor type range. Middle schools, it's a bit of a different story. There's been a lot of recent reinvestment in middle schools, both in terms of new schools to keep up with growth over the last decade or two, as well as a lot of reinvestment that started happening with examples like O'Brien and Swope that have recently happened. So it's kind of a different profile when you look at that set of schools, but there are definitely some outlier cases with Vaughn, Dilworth, and Sparks fitting, rounding out the top, Vaughn being the kind of worst among the entire group, and Clayton, Pine, Incline, Trainer being in that fair case, and you can see kind of the breakdown of what is contributing towards their various scores. Elementary schools, we can't fit them all on one page, and I don't want to go on slide by slide. Trust me, we will have a detailed report so you can find all the various schools you have interest in.
Hey, Mr. Mills, just one real quick question. You want us to wait for questions till the end, or do you want to take a few?
By all means, interrupt me.
Perfect.
I like the curveballs.
All right. Yep, you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, I wasn't sure which way we were going to go. Tons of questions.
I should have
as we-
prompted you. I'm sorry.
Tons of
invite
questions before we move in here. And I guess you were on middle school.
Okay.
And I'm super curious on the middle school with Sky Ranch Middle School that just recently opened out. How can the technology and furniture have red when it's a brand new school?
That's a good point, and it's probably an outlier case that we need. We're in final stages of QAQC. There might be a couple of little things now that might give some pause. That I'm providing some preliminary findings as well as some recommendations from that. However, when you look at each discrete item, each measure, the 150 of them on a 100-point scale, they're fractions of a point in a lot of cases. So the needle isn't going to move tremendously in terms of categorical change on the score. We know kind of the good schools from the bad, and we have an instrument to measure it. So
I'm just, because this is new, it's got all new technology, it's got all new furniture, obviously not like our old middle schools, and I just don't know where our gap is there. That having toured that, we approved all the money for it and what went inside of it. I don't know how that possibly is even accurate.
So a long time ago, a mentor of mine said, you throw in a few errors here and there to make people really dig in so that they own the report. But we are, like I said, we're still in number crunching phases, and there might be a case like that doesn't stand up to logic, and we'll make sure to focus on that. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, I'll let somebody else go because I had some others, but I'll wait. Go ahead.
Any other questions at this time? No? All right. I think there are a couple of, instances where some of those things pop out,
Sure.
the collaboration spaces in, 3 of the brand-new middle schools. One of them's an outlier. But I understand that this is preliminary data, and you guys are working through that, crunching those numbers, and we might call you on it when you come back to us.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
So moving on to elementaries, we just have the outlier cases, the extremes. I just put the few newest ones towards the bottom there, and then the worst of the worst towards the top. And these are your older baby boomers that really stand out as the ones that are really troubled, right? Driven largely by educational program, relationships, and collaboration. In a lot of cases, they have a lot of the old furniture that's been around quite some time, and the operational utility of those buildings. Those are the ones with the bad EUIs that are, and they're very small. They're expensive to operate based on just scale, because they built them for a different age when schools were built a different way and funded differently.
I do have a quick question on this. These are just the elementary schools that you've done assessments on, because I'm looking for Bud Beasley, and it wasn't on the previous, and
Yeah,
it's
my
not
little
there.
ellipsis in the middle there, I couldn't possibly show all the middle or elementary schools at once, so I just kind of looked at the extremes of your
Okay,
best.
yeah, and I was looking, I'm like, I don't think this
Yeah,
is
that's not
all of them. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Right. So I do have all of them on the next slide. There's a dot for every school that's on the page here, and let me show you how to read it. There are columns for elementary school, middle school, and high school. There's a lot of takeaways from this. I'm going to slowly walk you through. Within each pane for elementary, middle, and high school, it's kind of a scatter plot of age. So to the left, the older schools. To the right, your newer schools. The y-axis going up and down is the bottom is your least adequate, and the top are your most adequate. There's in the trend line that you can, it's hard to see on the monitor here, but it's a gray line that kind of underlies it. Just kind of shows you that upward swing, that correlation between age and adequacy that we showed with the prototypes as well. And that's something that just validates kind of the instrument as holding up to most logic cases with a, occasional error or exception here or there. A few other things to point out. We use the good, fair, poor to bracket them out, and a few things jump off the page. There's definitely classes, and I pointed out when we looked at the high schools, you have one green high school, the one you just built, and there's a lot of otherwise parity, more or less fair to poor facilities across the entire county in your high schools. Some worse than others, for sure, but that stands out quite differently from your middle schools and elementary schools, where there's been more recent investment, particularly in the middle schools, where the gulf between those that have state-of-the-art, amazing new facilities and those that are in the 50s and 60s still today, and 70s, those older buildings, and there's only a few of them. So it's really kind of a call when we're talking about equity and efficiency. The equity aspects shines a huge light in terms of middle school as a quick opportunity to really move the needle dramatically for an entire age bracket that's fragile for a lot of youngsters. Also, we looked at the size of the school. So the size of the circle is representative to this current year's enrollment as part of it. And we'll have a slide in just a second to take another lap around size. But you can see there the ones that are newer, the ones towards the right within each pane, tend to be larger than the ones that are older. We build them newer, bigger, and scaled in a way that very diverse programs can be offered at the schools at larger scales and can be staffed based on your funding formulas in Nevada. And it's not just in Nevada, that is a consistent thing we see across the country. Another thing we did as well, we cross-tabulated this with the percentage of free and reduced lunch participation at each school. That's that little blue halo that shows up behind those circles. And what's interesting is you can see predominantly, particularly when you look at the elementary schools and middle schools, as an indicator of poverty, those schools that are the oldest, that are in the worst condition, and are the least adequate for school operations tend to be where you have communities of poverty. When you talk about equity, it gets right between the eyes. Now, there's something to celebrate here. When you look up and high on middle and high school, your recent investments at Hug High School with Desert Skies, with the O'Brien replacement, this has started to move that needle in a very dramatic way that should be celebrated, and it's a pattern that we're recommending to continue, to take this trajectory and really push that equity and efficiency angle of the FMP. So there's a lot on the page, and it's kind of my data dorky way to convey a lot of stuff quickly, but I wanted to share with you, this is one picture can tell a huge story about where we stand with your portfolio of schools. All right, moving on to the next slide, more data. So instead of looking at coloring by kind of good, fair, poor of the adequacy of the buildings, this one we actually did kind of a benchmarking of size range based on whether, it's a range for elementary, middle, and high school. We used kind of national standards that we tend to use and bracketed them around we even had an extra large category, none of them fit into that, but we looked at large, kind of an optimal and green, the blue ones, whether it's light blue being small or the darker blue being very small, based on industry standards. We're working with staff on defining among our options. We're looking at kind of that optimal range for an efficient use of your resources to operate a school for the long haul. And we're looking very closely at this, particularly where you have those small and very small schools. And when you look at the map where they sit, they're all in close proximity to each other. These are the older schools and the old core of Reno Sparks that are in the worst condition. They're small, they're underutilized, they're inadequate, they're in close proximity to each other. There's many, many opportunities. Based on the blessing of your WC1 funds that you have, you're in a unique position among many of my clients to really address this and move the needle in a profound way. So that's kind of the high level overview type stuff of what we're seeing in the data, and it really speaks to what we're coming to you with a strong sense of urgency. There is a wonderful opportunity because of your WC1 funding that's available. We have a resource here to really transform communities like you have with Vaughn, with Swope, with Hug. There's amazing opportunities that stand in front of us here, and your team has challenged us to say, look at, and we designed this process knowing that we would come to you around this time frame with, based on an initial blush of what the data is, and as we're doing design work around options, are there any low dangling fruit, obvious recommendations we can make to confidently move forward in a way, and we're bringing one of those to you today. So that opportunity is really about the school year, the fall of 2025, which is hard to even imagine that's near term, but that is when the earliest case where we could open up a major project. And that's contingent on a few things. One is that we got to take action right away to be able to make that work. Also, doing a long process for major design on a new facility, doing a major renovation type work that's very complicated, probably doesn't pan out. It really lends itself, this timeline to hit that aggressive schedule is to do something like you've done at O'Brien, to do a transformative replacement type opportunity where you have a prototype solution that can be site adapted and applied to a campus in a way that can be done quickly to hit this benchmark. Because you have these resources and the need is so great out there, we have the opportunity here, if we take action here in December, to go down a course that hits 2025 and not create a scenario where we have to open a school mid-year, which is very disruptive, or even worse, to lose an entire year when we have this opportunity in front of us. So your team has challenged us to come up with recommendations along those fronts, and we're up to the task. So categorically out of the chute, high schools and renovations are kind of, to hit that sort of time frame, aren't really feasible for it. The elementaries, while we could do a replacement elementary type solution for it, there's so many of them, and as you saw on the map, there's so many that are small in close proximity, and these are those baby boomers. There are dozens and dozens of these things. We're in the middle of planning those right now, and I don't feel it would be responsible to recommend any sort of dramatic move on those at this point. It's not that we're leaving them behind, it's just for an early action type recommendation, hold on a couple months and we're going to give you the drama for those schools as well. Okay. All right, so we didn't take this recommendation lightly. We looked at all sorts of considerations for it, right? Clearly, just the DNA of this process is we want to benefit the students with the highest needs earlier, if other things equal, and we want to improve the facilities that are in the worst condition, the most inadequate, and to take opportunities to improve utilization and operational efficiency. That's kind of the recipe of a smart master plan. However, we looked at things at this interim stage of the process. We want to make sure that we're not limiting other options by making choices today that could forestall something, that there are opportunities that are out there. So we look closely at that. Also being shovel ready to hit those timelines. So high schools being out, renovations being out, elementary schools being out, we really focused on middle schools. And remember how I mentioned you have kind of that, the disparity of many schools that are really state-of-the-art and a class of a few that are not. These are those few that really need some attention. We qualified them by all these different considerations, and I'm going to walk you through each one at a time. Starting with the one at the top, Vaughn. It's among your most neediest student populations in the county. nearly 85% free and reduced lunch participation at the school, and nearly a third English learners of that population, special education higher in proportion to other schools in the system, and sadly 41 homeless students. 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 6% of that school. Excuse me, I'm sorry. 6% means that in your average classroom, probably one student is homeless in that school. It's also among your most educationally inadequate in all the categories and things. Flunk, flunk, flunk. Vaughn was just one of the ones that fell towards the bottom of the list. The opportunity for right-sizing that school, that it's not built to the same size standards that you have today for energy, and it's among your most energy inefficient in your portfolio. So we're looking closely at that. It doesn't limit other options. It's on a single site by itself. It doesn't, unlike other schools, doesn't have another school across the field from it. That creates an opportunity we want to look closely at for options, and we have an achievable option as part of it. So looking at the others that we considered, not to just jump to conclusions immediately, we looked at Dilworth, where it's very similar with regard to Vaughn. A lot of the same challenges with regard to the adequacy of the school and the poverty that's in the area. However, the condition of that building is significantly better than Vaughn and other schools that are in your portfolio. And due to its location and the capacity in the areas and sorts of options that are under consideration, it's really lends itself towards a solution that might be different than just doing a complete reconstruction as part of it. So we look closely at that one. Trainer, Sparks, and Clayton.
If I could stop you for just a moment, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the category doesn't limit other options. Help me better understand what that means.
Sure, and we're at the right point to do that. For instance, Trainer, Sparks, and Clayton. Those are all schools where the middle school is right across the field from an elementary school. Typically a 60-year-old building that was built at the same time frame, that has the same inadequacies, the same poor conditions, the same underutilization in many cases, as well as the poverty in the areas. As part of it, those big sites are very precious. They're hard to come by. To come across a site that's that big creates a clean canvas potentially and an opportunity to do something transformative in those communities. And we really want to take the opportunity to do a little bit more work and finish this process and planning so that those precious assets that you have can be brought to highest and best use to serve those communities. Does that make sense and answer your question? Yes, sir. Great. All right, we looked at Pine real closely as well, and it's a similar situation with inadequacies of the building because it's from the same similar prototype, a little bit younger, so it's in a little bit better condition. It doesn't have quite the impact of poverty that we have in other areas. And based on its size and underutilization, we want to look closer at the opportunities, so improving utilization and other options that might be on the table. It's one that we're not comfortable recommending right away. Incline, while it has a lot of challenges that are different from the others, it doesn't have the same degree of socioeconomic need. Not that it doesn't exist out there, but just not in the same proportion. The condition of the building is a bit better, and you have extreme underutilization at that school, as you know, and it persists from the elementary to the middle and the high school. And we are taking a very custom, specialized approach to the entire Incline Village school communities so that we can serve K through 12, all students in that community in a better way that's more efficient and can support a sustainable school program. So not recommended at this time. But really, at the end of the day, there's really one that stands out as our recommendation, and that's Vaughn. That with confidence, looking at the data, the need that's there, the resources you have, the inadequacy of the building, the opportunity to right size, to take down one of your most inefficient schools and bring to a community that really direly needs it, a new facility to have transformational outcomes, we, with full confidence and with a sense of urgency, recommend we move forward with that process. And so I have a bit of next steps, and Adam pointed out to me we're losing quorum quickly here, so I want to, before I just jumped into next steps, I really want to open up for any questions you might have.
Go ahead.
Justin Ivory for the record. Is this school more like the one we just did at Swope? And I'm wondering, Swope is the one that we're doing right now, right? Are we talking about doing another renovation to this one like we did at Swope, or we're talking about build a new school, tear this one down the following year?
So when we look at the costs associated with, there's a cost avoidance opportunity of about $16 million just in deferred maintenance that's over the near-term horizon. We don't have the cost messaging in yet, but typically, particularly based on the inadequacy of that building, to bring it up to today's standards, you'd have to pour in probably double that again just to upgrade the building. And it would be an undersized school at that. To bring in an addition on top of that, we're talking about 50, 60, $70 million of reinvestment into that older building that tips it to a point where it's like, we really need to consider maybe starting over. So we're probably looking at, and to hit your timeline, that the O'Brien solution of building on the ball fields and then, safely separated from the ongoing school operations, then moving the children into it, then demolishing and restoring the site with new ball fields would be the recommendation.
Quick question.
Sure.
So, I mean, this might be for Adam. So as we look at, and I would agree as I look at all of the schools in Dilworth, obviously, being right, in my neck of the woods and next to City Hall, Dilworth, kind of second on that list. And, but Vaughn, I can see, that the priority should be with Vaughn. As we build it, what are we looking at capacity? Because once again, we run all the numbers of an area and the demographics and how many kids, and sometimes we're right. Sometimes, like for Stonebrook, we're not even close, or we're not that we're not close. But, so what size will we be building at the same size as the current school? Will we be depending on the enrollment figures we have now and we're going to get next fall? How do we determine, as you're doing your design, I guess, what is your plan right now for what size of school? I guess, bottom line.
I'll take that. Adam Searcy for the record. Initially, with a rebuild recommendation, we would be looking at the O'Brien Middle School prototype, but also noting that not only is that building itself somewhat reconfigurable, so the footprint, it can be sort of separated and rearranged, but the total number of classrooms is also scalable. So we haven't done that analysis yet, but we very much will endeavor to project the enrollment very carefully, look at even rezoning scenarios that might optimize, hey, is there a scenario where we want to actually move students into this zone to fill a potentially approximately 1,400 student capacity middle school is what we built at O'Brien. Not sure that we'll build it exactly that, but that's the direction that we would be heading.
And current enrollment is south of 700 right now. Yeah.
Any other questions on the report we've gotten so far? Doesn't look like it, so, Mr. Mills?
Okay, so here's our roadmap with our different committees and where we are. We're in this scenario development stage, November, December timeframe. We have a lot of hard work ahead of us, finalizing all the data, drafting options that are going to be vetted through your stakeholder groups as well as your communities over the January, February timeframe, contemporaneous with the next time that we'll be updating you on where we stand on things. And at that point, the options will be out there in the public and we'll have some preliminary feeling of where the surveys are going. It might still be open by the time we're presenting, but we'll have a good sense of where things are. We might have some supplemental recommendations for stuff that's in every scenario and is no-brainer type work to move forward with. But at this point, we've been challenged to present one that we can hit by the 2025 year. So we look forward to that presentation to you in February. Oh, sorry about my animation here. And just kind of a reminder of the superintendent and team. Apologies. Made it clear to us that as we go through the design stuff, that all options are on the table, right? In addition to some terminology we're using about the degrees of rebuilding the campuses, that we're also looking at all the educational programs, the portfolio alignment, whether it's feeder realignment, grade configurations, and we're examining K-8. We know that changing something like that's dramatic and difficult, but in areas where we have lower enrollment, it might make some sense, 7 through 12, pre-KK, et cetera, and even consolidation scenarios where it's not a detriment, but rather a trade-up scenario, newer, fewer, better opportunities for students. That concludes our presentation. Any other final questions?
All right, go ahead.
So, and I'm looking, I can't find it here. I thought, do we not need to make a recommendation? It's too early to make a recommendation on this course of action. I thought for the 2025, you were listing on the December meeting. Is that next December?
So that's actually the next item on our agenda, I believe.
Okay,
Right. So
because that would be included in the next agenda item. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this informative item for Mr. Mills? We'll grab the public comment on the action items. All right, not seeing any on this non-action item, we'll go ahead and open up item 2.04, which is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval of $3.5 million
Okay.
to the 2022-2023B Major Projects Program. Mr. Searcy.
Thank you very much. Queuing up the attachment for this item 2.04, you see our familiar, if small font, ever more densely populated list of projects. I'm try to enlarge this a little bit. So just to reiterate a little bit what Mr. Mills described, the work is ongoing throughout the spring of 2023, and there are many exciting and important opportunities in front of us that we will tackle individually and bring back to the committee. But it has been clear in our participation in the analysis and the presentation from Cannon that Vaughn Middle School and a rebuild of Vaughn Middle School is a justified recommendation. And so in support of that, we are bringing forward a budgetary recommendation of $3.5 million that represents a partial funding of the design phase that allows us to begin that work initially and carry us through the end of this fiscal year, in an effort to try to cause that project to open as soon as the 25-26 school year. That's this item.
Mr. Diss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your indulgence, Vaughn is the partner in education of the Grand Sierra and has been for years. A large proportion of the kids who go to school there are children of our team members at GSR. And I make several visits along with a lot of people that I work with to Vaughn, and we try to do what we can to help them out because, as Mr. Mills made clear, that school needs a lot of love. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd like to recommend approval of $3.5 million to the 22-23B Major Projects Program and to forward a recommendation to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees.
I'll second.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. Is there any comment on this from any of the board members? Okay, I know we've got public comment. At least I'm assuming the public comment card is for this one. Oh, gotcha, okay. All right, so we have no public comment on this item. So we have a motion, we have a second. No further discussion, so all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. With that, I know we've got a member that needs to leave, which is going to make our quorum disappear. So one thing I'd like to maybe do before we move forward is, I think it would be appropriate if we can get a motion from someone on the board to move the items 2.05, 2.06 to the February meeting. I think that's the proper protocol, not having the legal here, so.
You can do it. If you can do it in 10 minutes.
You know what, honestly, it's treacherous outside, and with deep respect and appreciation to the staff who prepared the material and are in attendance, these are not time-sensitive matters, and I think on balance, it's appropriate to adjourn the meeting at this time.
All right. Good with everybody?
Do you need a motion?
I think we probably should have a motion to push those since we still got a quorum here. I think we can do that.
All right, well then, I would move that we make a motion to move 2.05 and 2.06 to the next meeting in 2 months, which would be the February meeting.
I'll second that motion.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, that's a unanimous there. And so, since Mr. Dis gave us maybe 10 more minutes, I think we've got the last item, which is public comment. I saw a public comment card, so we can get that one out of the way, and then we can close this meeting out and be good.
Yes, we have a public comment from Pablo Nava Duran.
Good morning. Good morning. I never attended the Copper Funding Protection Committee, and I saw the factory moderation of a Vaughan Middle School, and I did make a survey about Pine Middle School need to be rebuilt similar to O'Brien because Pine O'Brien will build a similar building back to 1975, which is the same years, and I heard of many Pine parents, teachers, staff, or administrators wanted to build the new school similar to O'Brien, but it seemed like the presentation seemed like the Vaughan Middle School need to rebuild first. And I do agree with Adam Seeley and all the group over here. And I do know Vaughan is a low income school with Taiwan school, very high disproportionate student who need a lot of love. And I've been to a substitute teacher at Vaughan Middle School Thursday and today, and I do know many of us students who have a hard time focus on learning based on their learning environment with the building. And then Vaughan Middle School is similar to Swope and Trainer, but for Vaughan, it's not a case for Vaughan because they're the oldest middle school in the Washington County School District, the most inefficient building in Washington County School District, and they probably need a new school, need a lot of love. I grew up with the Vaughan neighborhood. They definitely need a new school. So I have a question from Adam Sisley. So for Vaughan Middle School, a woman is 700. So the new building will be 14,000. So are you gonna put all the current Vaughan school for Vaughan Middle School when they build in 2025, that goes back to go and attend new school. And I have a question. So question number 2, are you going like maybe rezone all the surrounding neighborhoods, Swope, Trainer, Pine, Excelsior? So I want to say thank you and have a nice day.
All right, thank you. Not seeing any other public comment. Item 3.02, next meeting February 2nd. And then with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.